Kamsahamnida. So allow me to present my briefly to talk to you about the cruise industry post-COVID, and particularly global cruise recovery and the cruise status for Asia and its prospects. It's my honor to do this. Thank you to the Secretariat of World Ocean Forum for inviting me to speak to you about this. As you heard, my name is Ted Blamey. I'm the principal of Chart Management Consultants. We advise the cruise industry and have been doing this since 1997 all over the world, but particularly in Asia. I have the honor to have been a president and CEO of one of the major global cruise lines and also chairman of one of the major ports, this one in Sydney. And these days, as I say, a consultant. So this is what I propose we discuss over the next 20 minutes. Firstly, it's important to draw a distinction between destinations and source markets. Then I would like to advise you about what's been happening in the global cruise industry since COVID, talk about Asia, both before and after COVID, and the status in 22 and 23 for Southeast Asia versus East Asia. And then let's talk briefly about Korea as both destination and source market, and what is required to bring cruising back to this part of the world, and finally a concluding comment. So, to discuss and measure and assess the cruise industry, it's essential for us to distinguish between the source markets, which is where the passengers come from, the citizens of a country who take a cruise anywhere in the world, and we measure this with CLIA every year for each of the 12 Asian markets. It's published in CLIA's Asia Ocean Source Market Report. And as an example, we can say that 48,700 Korean people cruised anywhere in the world in 2019. The other big element, the other side of the balance sheet, are the destinations, which is where the passengers go to. The ports, the islands, and so on, where cruise ships call on their itineraries. And this is measured in terms of deployment, capacity, and the port calls every year by us. And this is published in CLIA's other report, Asia Deployment and Capacity. For example, Busan had 101 transit calls, 8 turnarounds in 2019, which brought a potential 194,000 plus passenger destination days to Busan. So when talking about the cruise, be wary when somebody says the market is this. Are they talking about the number of passengers, where they come from, or are they talking about the number of passengers who go to the destination? So with this behind us, let's talk about what's happened to the global cruise industry since COVID. Well, it's back. It's back at close to full service. In fact, almost 100% of the global fleet is in operation. That means more than 550,000 berths on more than 270 ships are operating in more than 100 countries, with, of course, significant economic impact to the host countries, to the employees, and for jobs. And this is due to immense efforts to redesign the cruise experience since COVID, guided by experts in health and safety, with the governments and the health authorities working together, reflecting what the COVID status might be in different regions, with an holistic door-to-door safe strategy for the passengers, with response, contingency planning and execution all ready to go in place, with passenger, crew and destination health and welfare covered. The other exciting thing is that research done by CLIA, the Cruise Lines International Association, shows that holidaymakers are ready. They're ready to cruise again. 84% of past cruisers want to cruise now, and 69% of people who haven't cruised before. And this is reflected in great demand that's going on elsewhere in the world, not in East Asia, as we will see in a minute. So what about Asia? This is the calendar we produce every year to show what cruise ships are operating across Asia. And we see many cruise ships were deployed. I won't go through the table in general, but to summarize, there were 79 ships cruising in or through Asian waters, and they represented many different cruise lines. In blue, 19 premium and contemporary cruise lines. In Pink, 11 upscale cruise lines, and in gold, 5 luxury and 4 green expedition cruise lines. That was pre-COVID. That meant 1,786 Asia cruises plus another 131 voyages. That's where a ship departs or returns somewhere outside of Asia, but goes through Asia. So that meant over 9,000 cruise days and a passenger capacity of over 4 million people in Asia, people from all over the world, Asians, Europeans, Americans, Australians. So also at the same time, pre-COVID, Asia was a series of hugely important source markets. In fact, mainland China reached the #2 position globally. There were big markets in Taiwan, Singapore, India, and Hong Kong and Japan. These are the numbers 2018 and 2019. You'll see how many thousands of people cruised and their share. But not only that, Asia was a heavily visited series of destinations. There were over 7,000 port calls in Asia, and 59% of those were in East Asia, as you'll see in the table below. A quarter of the East Asian cruises were turnarounds. So that table shows you the number in East Asia, as also summary South Asia and South Asia. So a huge source market and a huge destination. So what happened in 2020? Well, everything stopped in March 2020 when the impact of the pandemic became clear. But it began again in a small way, but began already in July. And then there was a rolling sequence announced. First of all, the Dream Cruises Explorer was operating out of Keelung as early as July 2020. Out of Singapore, the World Dream operated from November, and then the Quantum of the Seas in December. In 2021, Hong Kong began operating cruises with the Genting Dream out of Hong Kong in July, the Spectrum of the Seas in October. And all through this time, as Saburo Tanaka will tell us, I'm sure, there were activity going on for domestic passengers with Japanese cruise lines operating out of Yokohama. But all of these were not continuous. They weren't year-round, and they weren't often full occupancy. They were capacity controlled. Nevertheless, a lot of activity began quite quickly, particularly in South Asia and also in Japan. So the cruise ports and destinations that were visited in 2021 reflect the limited deployment. This is our chart on transit, turnaround, and overnight calls. And though there were 40 ports that had at least one call, there were 280 in 2019. And the activity in 2021 was concentrated. Only 11 ports had 9 or more calls. Singapore had 43% of these, and Hong Kong 15%. Keelung, Mumbai, and Yokohama had 30 calls each. There were no calls in 2021 in Korea, and there were only 27 in mainland China. Very few cruise lines were active post-COVID. This is a summary of Asian deployment by cruise brand from top to bottom of the number of cruises. Just 6 brands were cruising anywhere in Asia, a total of 9 ships. Dream Cruises, 3 ships delivered 54% of all the cruises, and Royal Caribbean's 2 ships accounted for 28% of them. Mainland China was closed to internationals, but China Merchants Yidun had 13 7-night international domestic cruises from Shenzhen in the 4th quarter. Cordelia served the Indian market from September 21 with 29 cruises. And all the cruises, as you'll see in this table almost to the far right column, they're all very short. They were typically round-trip cruises with no ports, cruises to nowhere. So what happened is happening this year and is going to happen next year. Well, Southeast Asia is doing well, especially from the Singapore home port. Resorts World Cruises is operating Genting Dream since July from Singapore to Indonesia, then Malaysia, and was also embarking in Port Klang, Malaysia. Royal Caribbean is operating the Spectrum year-round since June from Singapore to Southeast Asian destinations. In 2023, things heat up again. Smaller premium and luxury ships will be back, in the first quarter, especially around the cherry blossom season in Japan. Norwegian Jewel will offer a big ship, 12 cruises from October and again in March. Some of those, and nearly all of those, are focused on Southeast Asia, but also Japan and Taiwan. Holland America's Westerdam will cruise in 23 from Singapore and also scheduled from Yokohama. And that will include Japan, Korea, in East Asia. Aida Bella will cruise late 23 and early 24, Southeast Asia, and Marella, first time, will have Port Singapore from November. So things are warming up in 2023 in particular. So Asian cruising is rebuilding despite COVID. This is cruise operations in Asia since March 2020. And what do we see? 6 ships after the COVID, not full-time, 10 ships in 2021, only 8 in 2022 because the Dream Cruises brand was closed. And 10 cruise ships so far are scheduled for 2023. This is way behind the pre-COVID period where there were 79 ships, as I told you earlier, in 2019. Still, it's an optimistic outlook. But that's Southeast Asia. What about East Asia, which is of great interest to those of us here on this conference? Well, problems. First of all, the destinations continue to be hard to get into. China and Hong Kong have been pursuing a zero COVID policy, means no international visitors, particularly ships. Japan has been very difficult. It's restricted to visitors. It's been very slow to allow ships to come back, international ships. It has onerous quarantine rules and the cruise lines consider it high risk. Korea, of course, has a bigger problem, a different problem. It's restricted to cruises departing mainland China, a restriction imposed by March 2017. Also, the source markets are now small. So mainland China, which was 2.4 million passengers in 2018, is only 6,000 last year, which was due to China merchant ship. Korea and Taiwan's pretty big, but together they're only large enough to justify basing one large ship in East Asia year-round, so that hasn't happened. Also, capacity had disappeared. Dream Cruises, which had 3 ships and was building 2 big ones more, it served the Asian cruises better than any other cruise line, and it was the first back after the March shutdown. It's no more. Sadly, it is gone, and so is its sister brand, Star Cruises. All the major international lines have deserted East Asia for now, as there's too much uncertainty. The cruise lines cannot deal with uncertainty. They need to be able to schedule their cruises at least a year in advance. And it's a long lead time to bring a ship back into service. Also, the next problem is that market forces have been blunted in East Asia. The travel agents in Asia were decimated through COVID, everywhere else in the world too, really. And so some cruising expertise was lost. The world, as we know, is facing economic slowdown and inflationary pressures. So some real headwinds for us in East Asia. What about Korea? Well, before COVID, Korea was a very important transit destination. In 2017, it had over 700 calls in the nation. Jeju Island was the most visited port for transits in all of Asia. Busan had several, and this is largely driven by ships being home ported in Shanghai, which was Asia's then largest home port. But by 2019, Korea had dropped to 156 from 700 transits. Jeju down 29 and Busan had 101, even though there were still cruises operating out of Shanghai. It by then was the second largest home port to Singapore. And as far as the home port is concerned, Korea is not really been one. 8 turnarounds in Busan and a couple here and there in Sokcho. Yet Korea has always been a very small source market, big destination, small source market. These are the numbers for Korea since 2012. The maximum ever reached was in 2019, 48,000 passengers, which is just 1.3% of all the passengers in Asia. And why is Korea source market yet to grow? Why is it small? I think there are several reasons. There's low supply. The cruise business is supply driven, but there have been very few Korea home port cruises, as we saw a second ago. So there's no visibility of cruise ships being in Korea on a regular or permanent basis. And also the onboard experience in general is not suited to Korean tastes. There's also limited demand, low supply and limited demand. There's some perception problems in Korea and awareness problems. For example, cruising is seen to be a luxury experience, unaffordable. This is, of course, not the case. Cruising is largely a mass market product with outstanding value for money, but not seen to be so by the Korean market. Going to sea in Korea is often thought to be, well, you do that for military purposes or for fishing, maybe for transport. Maybe it's even a bit scary. Well, it's not thought of primarily as a vacation product. Koreans who do have experience of going to sea are thinking probably more in terms of ferries, such as on the Baltic. Cruises are not like transportation. They are a fully packaged vacation. And there's been little push marketing by consumer advertising or successful TV show. Like Damu Cruise was a TV show in Korea. It didn't last. It was a very short season and didn't apparently get good viewership. But that drove cruising way back in the day in North America. And there's little pull marketing via social media, via word of mouth, or well-informed travel agency distribution network. So what's to be done to bring cruising back in East Asia? So everywhere in the world, to rebuild cruising, three core groups have had to come together in each nation: the cruise lines and the membership body, the governments, local and national, and the port authority and cruise terminal. These have been backed by science. The medical experts, as I said before, and health authorities have worked out how to make cruising totally safe, and often facilitated by the tourism authority. For example, Singapore Tourism Board has done a phenomenal job to rebuild cruising in Southeast Asia. So this has formed a three-way partnership. These partnerships are essential to get cruising restarted. Of course, backed by all supporting services, suppliers to the cruise line, the port agents, the tour operators, customs, quarantine, immigration, travel retail. So to return this region to be a prominent cruise destination, we need these partnerships. They need to understand the science and the new protocols and the product changes that the cruise lines have put in place around the world, then construct regulations that are based on the medicine and the science. Ensure the policy for cruise ship calls is attractive to the cruise lines, that it's clear and that it's transparent and that it is stable. Take away the uncertainty, which keeps them away. Reopen the borders with appropriate border controls and screening, and be flexible to loosen or tighten according to COVID developments ashore. Then collaborate with neighbouring countries, because regulations need to be consistent. Cruise lines can't deal with a whole raft of different ways of doing business from one port to the next. Then, of course, we would love to see a lifting of the restriction on travel to Korea from mainland. It's had a huge impact. It's a negative impact, both on the cruise travel for both nations and on the economies, because there's a whole string of fabulous ports along the coast of China that are hardly operating. So it's a great benefit to having cruising come back for both nations. But then to grow those destinations, what about growing the source market? Well, bold action is required with cruises. Supply. Start with short seasons by chartering ships customized to Korean tastes. Lotte Tour Development has done this with chartering Costa ships with success, but small so far. Then this could be extended as the market responds, like lengthening the season, providing more itinerary choices, and then more ships. And finally, somebody needs to invest on porting a ship, say in Busan, for a series of cruises. And by the way, that's how the mainland China was built. By Costa in 2006, Royal Caribbean, shortly after, was by taking an investment and waiting for the market to respond. Then, of course, the product here needs to be customized, as Lotte have done, put Korean staff on board, language, signage, cuisine, tour guides. Then educate the travel distribution network on why it's such a great thing to sell. The commissions are very high and they're all inclusive. The clients are supremely satisfied, so the travel agents get repeat business. And it's the easiest thing for them to package. They don't have to deal with putting together a whole bunch of different things to make an itinerary. It's all there in the cruise. Then use push marketing, advertisements and TV shows, and pull marketing. Put media on board the ships, social media influencers, and so on. So in conclusion, Asian cruising has a massive opportunity to recover. It's already happening in Southeast Asia. But the authorities in East Asia need to recognize the benefits to their economies and their citizens, understanding that cruising can be and has already been made safe. Get involved in discussions, forming partnerships, cooperate with cruise lines, ports, tourism authorities, and other stakeholders, collaborate with neighboring countries to agree a common set of protocols that all are comfortable with, and then remove the restrictions on cruise ships. Then, East Asia can once again be a prominent destination and a prominent source market. So, that is the end of my presentation on global recovery, Asia's status and prospects. I hope it has proved useful to you all, and I thank you for the opportunity. Look forward to the questions and answers. Kamsahamnida.